Today is kind of a study of opposites. You know, we heard from Howard in the London Underground, 148 years old. We're 16 years old. We started our light rail system in 1996. Carl talked about in Montreal how it gets a little cold there. In Texas, it gets a little hot. Last year, we had 100 days over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So, you know, all of those things kind of mix into how we do things and how we communicate with our customers. And as I said yesterday, that's really what it's all about. It's amazing, as we hear from London and Montreal, Hong Kong next, that Dallas is even in the room. You know, when you think about great transit cities around the country, you don't think about Dallas, Texas. You don't think about Texas generally. And so our job is to try to change that perception, change that opinion, certainly as we talk to folks, not only around the world, but in our own community. You know, when we first started this in 1983, and that's when DART was actually created and the voters actually voted to create us, a lot of people weren't too sure that it was going to work. As a matter of fact, a lot of people were convinced it wasn't going to work. And, you know, they had probably some good reasons for that, because when you look at our region, when you look at what our history was in North Texas, public transit and transit really didn't play into the picture. It didn't play into the design of the community, quite frankly. You know, certainly as you look at the older cities, New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia, and some of those that developed around there, London, certainly they developed around the transit systems over a period of years and years and years. In our case, we were built around roadways. We were built around highways. And it was the automobile, it was cheap gas that allowed us to do that. It didn't make sense at the time to really constrain anybody. It's just build more and more. And as a matter of fact, when you think about our city, other cities in the western United States like Denver and Phoenix, we don't have rivers and oceans and mountains to constrain us. The one thing that we have plenty of is land, and so consequently we do move further and further out as we grow, and of course as a result we end up with some of the worst traffic congestion in the United States. As a matter of fact, Chris and I were talking earlier about how you might monetize or I believe it's maybe not Chris, but we're talking about how you might monetize the savings associated with riding transit. Well, I know everybody has monetized the cost of being stuck in traffic. In Dallas, we have the distinction of being stuck in traffic 60 hours per year, 60 hours per year on average per person. Now, I don't know about you, but I could find a lot better things to do with my 60 hours per year than being stuck in traffic. But we monetize that. We don't oftentimes monetize the value when you're not stuck in traffic or riding transit. So as we transitioned from a car-centric, well, we did have transit in Dallas at one point in time. As a matter of fact, like a lot of cities around the United States, we had transit that sprung up in the early 1900s, 1910 or so. And by 1956, at least in Dallas, it was gone. 1956, we had a bus system that kind of went on, but it was a very small bus system. It wasn't very robust. It really didn't do anything. And so with the transit system going away, what happened is you ended up with growth and cheap gas, and those are all houses, and it's like that, and it just goes on and on and on. And it was great because everybody could have their third of an acre. They could have their own house and their own backyard and their own front yard, and they had their nice street and their trees in their front yard, and they had to move further and further and further away from the core city as they did this. So by the 1970s, traffic was unbelievable. as you tried to get back into the jobs, tried to get back into where the doctors were, the malls were, the shopping centers were, traffic became unbearable. And you know what happened was people, actually it was the business leaders that said, we need to do something different. We need to have transportation choices. We need to figure out how to get people around different than what we do now. So it was the business leaders that actually started the movement for transit. And many times when you talk about growing transit, certainly in the United States, the business leaders are the ones you want to engage, right? They're the ones that have the money to help influence the politicians. Those are the people that actually started the process in North Texas. So as they started that conversation, they said, how do we do this? And the conversations, by 1978, Dallas and Fort Worth, there was a lot of conversation about a single transit agency for the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In Dallas and Fort Worth, if you have any familiarity with our region, you know that the cities are 30 miles apart and they can't agree on anything. So it didn't work because Dallas wanted one thing, and if Dallas wanted this, Fort Worth wanted that. And so as a result of that, there was no clear agreement on how they were going to fund this new endeavor. But by 1983, we had come to a conclusion that we were going to have a transit system in Dallas and a transit system in Fort Worth, and the voters actually voted to tax themselves 1% sales tax in the Dallas side of the region. They voted to tax themselves 1% on the Dallas side of the region, and anybody could vote, any city could vote, and you think about what could have happened as a result of that vote. With any city voting, we could have ended up with Dallas maybe voting out and other cities voting in, or other cities voting out. And as it turned out, Dallas voted in, and 12 other cities also voted in. And you know, it was nice because those were the next ring of suburbs. It made a lot of sense in 1983. We didn't have a lot of cities very far outside that first ring of suburbs that voted for transit. So it was a nice compact service area, 700 square miles, and as I said yesterday, 2.2 million people inside that service area. But as you look at our region today, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, if you look at our region today, that's only 30% of our Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area. So that's a challenge that we've got. Now, you know, not everybody was supportive of what we were doing in the beginning. Some people actually thought it was a bad idea. Fortunately, they were the vocal minority, and they worked hard to convince folks that this wasn't a good idea, that we could buy everybody a new car with the money that we were spending on transit. Because remember, it's all about cars and it's all about roadways, so why not just buy everybody a car? Well, obviously these folks didn't get the support that they'd like to get and that they wanted, although they're still there. These people are still there, they're still out in the community, and when anything happens wrong, you know, and Howard was talking a little bit about it's going to go perfectly through the Olympics. I know it will, but we've had a few incidents and some special events and things that didn't go exactly right, and these people kind of pop up. Like a jack-in-the-box kind of thing, and they pop up all of a sudden and they say, see, I told you so. But the good news is that most people believe that it really could happen and it really could make a difference because people really were looking for choices in how they get around. And it's back to all about choices. In our particular area, you know, where a lot of people are going to drive their car, you know, the person in the car next to you is hoping you'll get out of your car and ride the transit so they can have more room on the freeway. Because it really is about having choices. Today, we've got, you don't think about this happening in Dallas, Texas, we've got the longest light rail system in the United States. 72 miles or 116 kilometers of light rail. We've opened 55 stations. We've done it in 15 years, and we've done it under budget. And that's the part that, again, people look at and people talk about. And everybody says, well, Gary, of course you can do it under budget. As long as you build your budget big enough, you can always come in under budget, right? So every time we build a budget, we're always defending how we built the budget and what cost estimates we used, how we built the cost estimate, because when we come in under budget the next time, people say, well, of course you can come in under budget because you built your budget too big. So that's our challenge as we continue to build, as we continue to grow. And you know, when you think about it, when we started this in 1983, there were only 7 light rail systems at the time. Today there are 35 light rail systems around the country. Of course, Phoenix, Houston, Salt Lake, Denver, Portland, Seattle are all building, expanding their systems along with Dallas. And there were only 10 commuter rail systems when we started, and now there are 28 commuter rail systems. So that's what's happening throughout the country as people continue to think about how they're going to move around, how they're going to get from point A to point B. They really are looking for choices. So in addition to the light rail system, we also operate a commuter rail system, 55-kilometer long commuter rail system that goes between Fort Worth and Dallas. We have 130 bus routes, 84 miles or 135 kilometers of HOV or high occupancy vehicle lanes. Of course, our paratransit system, a whole toolbox full of tools to help people get from point A to point B. And we work quite frankly, we work very closely with the highway folks, the toll road folks, and of course the local cities to make sure that the systems all integrate and all operate together, because again, it's not as easy as walking out of the hotel and a block away and getting on the subway station in Dallas. You have to think about your trip, you have to plan your trip, and you have to think about the time of day, just like you do here, and the traffic and everything else. So with all that going on, we're not done yet, because the constant cry for us is, when are you going to get to our community? Where's your next line going to be? How quickly can you get it? And oh, by the way, don't be late. And you know, when we were talking about this earlier too, when you've got a system that's based on sales tax, primarily 74% of our revenue comes from sales tax. I know some of you are saying 74% of your revenue comes from fare box or more, and in our case, it's a little bit backward still. In some part, it's by design. It's keeping fares a little bit lower, encouraging people to get out of their cars, get on the system. $4 a gallon gasoline, as I mentioned yesterday, might be low for you. It's high for us, and that helps. I'm always pulling for higher gas prices. Now, part of that is because as an operator, you know, I also have to buy fuel, but I have my diesel hedged, and I have my natural gas purchased through 2020. So I'm pulling for those higher prices, Carl. We're hoping for great high prices. It gets people, because that's one of the things, quite frankly, that gets people out of their cars. And so, but that's not where we end. We've got the orange line that is under construction now. You know, everybody wants to connect to the airport. So the orange line, as you can see on the left of the screen, actually starts that direction. It's 22.5 kilometers long. We'll open the first phase in July of this year. We'll open the second phase in December of this year, and then we'll actually get into the terminal at DFW Airport in 2014. We also have a blue line extension on the right of the map that is 7.2 kilometers long, and it will open this December. You know, we talked a little bit about yesterday about the different delivery methods. We've used design, bid, build, low bid. We've used construction management, general contractor, CM at risk. We've used design, build contracts. Doing that process, going through a process like that, involving the community, not involving the community as much on the station design, is one of the challenges that we look at. And so as we look at our next extension, which is actually the blue line on the south end of our system, as we talk to the community about what that looks like and how that works, they really, really want to be more involved in the station design. They want to be involved in the transit-oriented development that occurs around it. And so as a result, we're saying maybe design build isn't the right approach for that particular line, because as we know, if we start too quickly into the construction process and we have to back up, it's going to cost us a whole lot more money. So we're actually looking at a hybrid delivery method on that particular line, that we can start early, and notwithstanding the fact that everybody wants that line completed, of course, within the next couple of months, and we haven't started design yet. So that's our challenge, is how can we get that line done as quickly as possible? How can we keep the community involved in the station design? And how can we make sure that it's the best project for everybody involved? Now, to do all of that, we work very closely with the community. We always have, and we always will. And you know, that's one of those things that once you start involving the community, you really can't back out of that. They just demand that you want more involvement at that point in time. So you start having those conversations. We started having these conversations in 1983. What does our system look like? How does it work? You know, all the different things that you would hope we do. Where does the line go? Does it impact my neighborhood? How does it impact my neighborhood? If I have to cross with light rail, you're crossing the tracks, sometimes either in your car or sometimes on foot. How does that work? How do the fire trucks and the police cars get across the tracks to my community? All of those things have to be discussed. And then you get into the actual design of the system. And we've actually got an art and design program that we work on all 55 stations. We worked with the community around that particular station on what that station looks like. What color is it going to be? What are the materials? Is there a specific or significant art project that ought to be associated with that station because of their community? And you can start to think about what stations might look like if you've got the zoo station, or if you've got a station in a part of town that's you know, of one ethnicity or another ethnicity, or a particular historical event associated with that station, then that community is involved in how that station actually looks, how it feels. And when you do that, people are actually invested in your project then. Not only do they take ownership of your project or their station, then they're protective of their station too. So if there's graffiti or if there's vandalism or those kinds of things at the station, they're the first ones to raise their hand and say, wait a minute, we're not going to allow that in our community. We're not going to allow that at our station. And when things do happen, they're the first to call us to make sure that we go out and take care of it very quickly. So when you involve the community at that level, you of course strengthen your ridership. You reinforce your value to the community, to the cities that are paying to have you there. And of course you create enthusiasm about the system. Now the challenge, I think, for all of us, though, is the funding and how it works. And of course, in the United States, we're hopeful that the federal government will come up with a transportation bill. And just to put that in perspective, what they've been doing for the last several years is coming up with a 6-year transportation bill. The last transportation bill expired in 2009, September of 2009. And out of that transportation bill, many systems across the United States get formula funds based on your size, but we also get discretionary funds for specific capital projects. The challenge, of course, is that they haven't renewed that bill, so we're going on a continuing resolution, so that makes it hard to plan into the future. You can't really plan for that next project if you don't know where the money is going to come from or if there's going to be money. And that's one of the challenges that we certainly face as we go on. Now, to put those things in perspective, as I said, in the early 1990s, there were very few transit authorities that were actually pursuing federal funds like our starter system. Approximately 36 agencies were also pursuing funds in the early 1990s. More than 200 agencies are pursuing funds in this last transportation bill. This past October, as you can see, there was $1 billion in federal spending. 300 projects were awarded a piece of the $1 billion. So that means $3 million, if you on average, you got $3 million per project. And $3 million US is nice, but it's not going to build very much. You can't do a whole lot with that. There were 800 projects that were actually submitted for that $1 billion. That's the magnitude and the challenge as we continue to fight for transit funding in the U.S. Now, again, the challenge, of course, is that people are demanding it. And you can see from this, ridership grew from 1995 to 2010. Ridership grew by 21%. In that same time period, traffic volume only grew by 24%. So transit ridership is growing much faster than car ridership at this point, but the federal government quite hasn't caught on that it's a good thing happening. APTA, American Public Transportation Association, which I happen to have the honor to be chair of this year, has just reported that we've got 10.4 billion trips that were just taken in the 2011 time period, which is the highest since 1957, which is right after the World War II. And 2010, 77% of all transit-related ballot initiatives passed across the country. So there's a need, there's a desire, there's a cry for choices, public transportation choices. So what are we going to do? We're going to continue to try to figure out how to make this happen. This is that South Oak Clif extension that I've talked about. To make sure, this was in our financial plan at 2019. People are saying, how can you move that up to 2015? How can you make this happen sooner? And so we've looked at how we can refinance our debt. How can we restructure finances? How can we incorporate everybody involved to make sure that the design of this project works and works well? And so we're going to move this up to we're debating right now 2015, 2016, but we're still working with the community. We just locked in the alignment with the community not 6 months ago even. So we've got to go through the preliminary engineering and then get this into the design and construction phase. The Cotton Belt Corridor, our first east-west corridor, 62-mile corridor that runs across the entire Dallas-Fort Worth area. This is another one of those in our financial plan, and we do a 20-year financial plan. It's in the 2030, 2035 time frame. People are saying, Gary, you've got to get this project done now. So as we look at the different models of how we can move it up, public-private partnerships, different funding mechanisms, I visited and spent time with my friends in Madrid and my friends in Taipei on how they're doing things, how they're funding and financing their projects. And it doesn't automatically transfer to what we're doing in North Texas, but there's an awful lot of ideas on what they're doing, how they're doing things that we can then apply to this project. Obviously, you know, as we talk about public-private partnerships, it's a great idea. It's another way to actually borrow money, quite frankly. We can borrow money in the U.S. because we're a public entity, we can borrow money a lot cheaper than a private entity can. But if you don't have the debt capacity, then you have to look for another way to do it. And so that's what we're looking at. The challenge is, I've found out that when you ask private investors to pay for this line, they want to get paid back. I don't understand that. That's the challenge that we have, because we don't have any money to pay anybody back until 2035. So we're looking at the developable opportunities around our stations. How can we take advantage of that? Who owns the property? And so those are the kinds of things. And as we've looked at it, we think that we can probably, just with a tax increment finance district, because I can't take that property around the station and let someone develop it and have all access to it, but I can take the tax increment off of that property as it's developed and capture that. We think that's about a quarter of the project cost. So that's one idea. Of course, we'd love for the federal government to be a part of this project. They may or may not, and that would be a nice thing. And if they are, we think that might be about a quarter of the cost, so we're halfway there. So as we continue to look at how we would fund this project, we continue to look at how we can challenge ourselves to get the appropriate money to do this. The other challenge on this project is it goes to a lot of very urban communities, and we want commuter rail. And so we're working very closely with several manufacturers around the world on how we can get a smaller, but in our country, an FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, an FRA compliant vehicle. In other words, we want to be able to run our passenger traffic and the freight traffic on the same line in the same corridor throughout the day, and that's another challenge as we work through this. So those are the types of things that we're doing in Dallas, the types of opportunities, the types of challenges that we have. And as we continue to work with our communities, as we continue to work with the people in our communities, they're the ones driving what we're doing. They're the ones dictating how we do it. Of course, we've got to manage their expectations. We've heard about that this morning earlier. I talked yesterday about one of those expectations when we first opened the Green Line to Fair Park. The Fair Park is State Fair of Texas. If you ever have the opportunity to go to the State Fair of Texas, it's a wonderful thing. Food that you've never heard of and you probably won't want to eat again is there. The football games, all kinds of 3 million people go to that single venue in a 3-week period. And the first time we had a light rail to that particular venue, as I mentioned yesterday, we planned for 50,000 folks going. We had 130,000 folks attend. It was a pretty spectacular day in a lot of ways. A lot of people couldn't get on the trains, and the thing that we didn't understand and didn't anticipate is how many people would try to get on the train in North Texas going to that particular venue. 2010, 2011, it worked a whole lot better. The crowds dropped a little bit in 2010. They picked up in 2011. We anticipate big crowds in 2012 as we continue to try to match up people's expectations. But you know, in Dallas, Texas, it's one of those deals. We're just now getting used to showing up at the train and not being able to sit down. You have to stand up on the train on your ride into work. That's managing folks' expectations. I have most of the newspaper editorial writers that ride the train to and from work every day. So they're always offering input on how I can do things a little bit different and a little bit better. So we get a lot of input, a lot of suggestions from a lot of folks, and we take that very seriously as we figure out how to provide transportation choices around our region. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.